let's talk about quarterly goals. Now, before you click out of this video and you're like, I don't do quarterly goals, hear me out. Because I think that hearing about what I think of about quarterly goals and the types of quarterly goals could just help you in breaking down your goals in general. But before we jump into the types of quarterly goals, I want to start with why I set quarterly goals in the first place. So this happened a number of years ago. When I first started setting goals, I did not set quarterly goals. And actually, let me tell you a secret. I totally skipped quarterly refreshes when I first started setting goals. But I can't go back and change that. What I can do is prioritize quarterly refreshes going forward and encourage you to do the same. So I wasn't doing quarterly refreshes. I was definitely not doing quarterly goals. Now, there is more to a quarterly refresh than just setting quarterly goals. There's also an annual refresh component. I actually did a video a couple of years ago about all the steps that I do in a quarterly refresh, and I'm not gonna rehash that here. That's not the purpose of this video. But what I do wanna talk about is that when I wasn't doing quarterly refreshes, I struggled to break down my annual goals in a way that was keeping me focused on them throughout the year. When I was having these big, vague annual goals, and I was just picking action steps every month, sometimes I would pick action steps that were helpful, that would get me closer to that annual goal, but sometimes my action steps weren't very helpful at all. And what I found was that if I could create a smaller focus, a smaller goal, a subset of that annual goal for one quarter, I could stay a lot more focused. I could pick more specific action steps. I could really check in with whether or not I'm making progress towards my annual goals. And I also felt a lot more accomplished because I felt like I could tangibly acknowledge whether or not I achieved that quarterly goal. So for me, having a smaller timeline that I set smaller goals throughout the year helps keep me focused on my annual goals and helps me make sure that I'm moving in the right direction. The other thing I want to say before we get into the types, I know this intro is a lot longer than a normal video. Your quarterly goals do not have to line up exactly with the calendar year quarter, right? So if we're talking about a normal January through December calendar, Q1 is January, February, March, Q2 is April, May, June, and so on and so forth. And that may line up really nicely with your life. If doing January to December goals makes sense for you and breaking up the quarters evenly every 3 months makes sense for you, awesome. But for a lot of us, our lives don't always line up perfectly like that, depending on what you do for a living, what your spouse does for a living, whether or not you have kids at home, whether or not your kids are in school, whether or not you homeschool your kids. There are so many factors that can impact the natural breaking points in your year. And so I would encourage you, when I say set quarterly goals, is to pick quarters that make sense for your life. So for example, this year, I set my Q1 goals went from January until our international trip that we left on March 7th. So that was my Q1. Then we were gone for a week. I took a break from goals. And my Q2 was from the day we got back on March, we got back on St. Patrick's Day, to the end of May. Because in my mind, summer is Memorial Day to Labor Day. And things are just different in the summer. The weather's different, the pool is open, all kinds of things are different in the summer. And so my Q3, or my summer goals, are from June till the end of August, June, July, August. Then I'm gonna do a set of Q4 goals for September, October, November. And then just like last year, I'm gonna take December off of goals. To me, no goals December fits really well with my life. That's what works for me. Your breaking points might be different. Maybe you actually set calendar year goals, right? So maybe you start new goals in August because that is what works for your family. Maybe your Q1 is August, September, October, and that is your Q1. And then you do Q2 is November, December, January, right? There is no right or wrong here. It's whatever makes sense for you and your life and your schedule. But I would encourage you to pick breaking points that you are going to check in with your annual goals and potentially pick quarterly goals that you're gonna focus on just for that next chunk of time. Okay, one more thing before we jump into the 3 main types of quarterly goals. These are options, okay? You don't have to have quarterly goals that look or feel like this, but this is what I found. All of my quarterly goals fall into one of these 3 categories. Some of your annual goals are gonna lend themselves to different types of quarterly goals. Sometimes you might want more than one quarterly goal. That also can really depend on how vague your annual goals are, right? If you are someone like me who picks very vague annual goals, I find myself a lot of times, depending on how busy my quarter is, which is something else I want to talk about, picking more than one quarterly goal for each individual annual goal. There's no rule that says it needs to be 1-to-1. I think last quarter, 2 of them had 2 and 1 of them had 1. The other thing, like I just mentioned, is you know so much more about your schedule for 1 quarter. So when you are picking these annual goals, you sometimes need to be a little bit more vague because you don't actually know how the year is going to pan out. Whereas when we're talking about just the next 2, 3, 4 months, I would encourage you not to go any further than 4 months. The next 2, 3, 4 months, you can really know what your schedule is going to look like, barring any, unforeseen chaos, which does happen. But you know a lot more about that time frame than a much longer time frame. So you can be a lot more specific about what you want your goals to be for that individual quarter. Now, sometimes I do still pick vague goals for quarterly goals. There's, again, no right or wrong, no rules here in goal setting. You can pick very specific goals that at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, you can literally go, check, I did that. Or you could pick more vague goals. Sometimes I pick vague goals and then I just rate myself on a scale of like 1 to 10 at the end of the quarter. How do I feel about that? If you watch my quarterly check-in videos, I've done it that way before. You can see how I feel about my quarterly goals. But again, that is totally up to you and totally unique to your goals and your situation. Okay, after the world's longest intro, let's get into the 3 types of quarterly goals. Number 1, which is the one I typically fall in most of the time, is a specific area of focus. So this really lends itself well to progressive type goals. Now, I'm gonna reference in this video the 4 main ways to break down your goals. So if you haven't watched a goal breakdown video in a long time, maybe refresh your brain on those. There's 4 main ways to break down your goals, and I'm gonna kind of match them up a little bit with the quarterly goals. However, there's a lot of mix and matching that can be done here. So area of focus. What I mean by this is a specific component of your goal that you are going to focus on. So let's say you have an overarching annual goal to focus on your physical health. That's a pretty vague goal, right? Totally fine. And then for the quarter, you are gonna have 1 quarterly goal that's focused on your water intake and 1 quarterly goal that is focused on your workout plan, right? And those are your quarterly goals. That is an area of focus within the overarching progressive goal of focusing on your physical health. Another example is, I'll give you my personal example. One of my quarterly goals is to have more creative time, to be more creative. I can't remember now what I actually called that annual goal, but it was about creativity and having more time for that. My quarterly goal this quarter is just to focus on using my coloring books. I just want to use, literally, it's that simple. And that's it. That's the area of focus for my particular goal for this quarter. What this allows us to do is get really clear on what action steps are important to us. Because if we just have that annual goal of focusing on our physical health or including more creative time, there are so many action steps that you could pick, right? There are so many choices. There are so many ways that you can go. But when we pick these specific areas of focus that we're going to prioritize in this individual quarter, we don't get so overwhelmed with the mass amount of action steps that we could possibly pick, right? If we're focusing on our water intake, our action steps are gonna be aligned with prioritizing our water. And we aren't gonna feel like we also need an action step for getting in our vegetables. And we also need an action step for making sure we get 7-8 hours of sleep. It's so easy to get off track and get distracted by all the different possibilities. And so by picking an area of focus, it allows me, this is what works for me, to stay focused on that one area. The area of focus also can work well for sectional goals. So let's say you have a goal to declutter your house, right? That's your overarching annual goal. Maybe your area of focus for the quarter is to just focus on the basement. I've done that before as well. All right, the next type of quarterly goal is a milestone or a set number of steps. So this type of quarterly goal obviously lends itself well to a chronological goal. So a goal that you're doing a set number of steps in a particular order. Your quarterly goal is how far you want to get, right? And this allows us to have that natural check-in point at the end of the quarter to see how far we are. By picking just a milestone that we're trying to get to or a set number of steps that we want to work on in that quarter, we are not feeling the pressure that we need to get to the final end state by the end of the quarter. One of the things that I have absolutely been guilty of in the past is thinking I need to make leaps when I only need to take a couple of steps. And what I have found here is this sometimes is helpful for you to kind of look at the entire year. I know that this video is coming out in June, so let's talk about just the second half of the year. Let's say you have a goal for the year to start a YouTube channel, and up until this point, you haven't really done much because you have, not only have you felt overwhelmed, it's the goal that always keeps getting pushed to the back burner and you've decided other things are more important, which is totally fine. That happens. But let's say second half of the year, things are feeling pretty good in like the other areas of your life and you're feeling pretty consistent. You're like, okay, I'm ready to focus on this YouTube channel. There are quite a few steps to starting a YouTube channel. And one option is that you could just pick action steps for the next month and go on, so on and so forth until you get to the end of the year. But let me give you another scenario. Let's say we are focusing on our quarterly goals. And so you decide that your milestone of what you're aiming to get to by the end of Q3 is that you are going to have your name picked out, you are gonna have the channel set up, and you are going to have 3 videos filmed. Not edited and uploaded, but 3 videos filmed. And that is the milestone. Those are the steps that you're trying to hit by the end of the quarter. Then you don't feel so overwhelmed. You're not thinking about like, oh, if I don't get 10 videos uploaded by the end of the quarter, I'm a failure. Or if I don't do this by the end of whatever, there is none of that. All of that pressure goes away when you are very specific that these are the steps that you are going to get to by the end of the quarter. And then once you achieve those steps, you can easily set up the next quarter to say, okay, my goal is to get these 3 videos edited and uploaded. You're not pressuring yourself to make a plan for the entire year. You're taking the first 3 steps and you're saying, I'm gonna get these 3 steps done in this individual quarter. All right, and then the last type of quarterly goal is a numerical goal. And this one is exactly as it sounds. It's picking a finite number that you are going to hit in this particular quarter. The reason that it's important that we talk about this one is I want you to know that every quarter doesn't have to be the same. So your quarterly goal does not have to be 25% of your annual goal. Let's again use an example that's like the second half of the year because we're halfway through the year when you're watching this video. So let's say you had a goal to complete an online course this year, and that course is 10 sections. There's 10 sections within that course. So every month you have put on your goals that you are gonna do 1 section. Some months it happened and some months it didn't. And now you're sitting at 3 sections. You've done 3 sections so far this year. And so you have 7 left if you're gonna hit it by the end of the year. So my first question is that reasonable? Do you feel like you can do that? And you look at your calendar, you look at the length of the sections and you're like, I can commit to that. First half of the year was a little bit rocky, but I know that I can do that. So then you look and you're like, okay, but Q4 is gonna be a lot busier than Q3. So I think in Q4, I don't wanna be focusing on as many sections as in Q3. So you decide that you're gonna set a goal to do 5 sections in Q3. That's your numerical quarterly goal. That way, your goal for Q4 can be 3 because you know that things are going to be busier then. The point of this example, I probably could have used better numbers that made things a little bit easier, is all of the quarterly numerical goals don't have to be exact. Let me give you another example. This is the example I typically give when I'm talking about numerical goals not having to be even, but it works better when I talk about the year as a whole. So let's say you have a goal to read 20 books over the course of the year. And let's say you're a teacher and you know that your time during certain quarters is a lot less, right? Q1 and Q2 are both incredibly busy. It's getting back into school after the holiday break and then closing out the end of school is chaos. But you know that Q3 you have a little bit more downtime. You're still prepping for the new year. There's still days that you've got to be doing things, but you have a little bit more time in Q3 than the other quarters. So you decide that your quarterly goals for Q1, Q2, and Q4 is going to be 4 books in a quarter. And then you say in Q3, I'm gonna read 12. I'm just making these numbers up, but the purpose here is to remind you that your numerical quarterly goals don't have to be evenly broken down. You pick what makes sense based on where you are at and what you can realistically accomplish in any given quarter. I don't know how I rambled on about that for as long as I did. I thought this was gonna be a much shorter to the point video, but those are the 3 types of quarterly goals. Hopefully this helps you come up with some ideas as you are picking your goals and your quarterly goals, hopefully for Q3, if you haven't already. We do have a coaching call as a community on Sunday. If you're watching this video the week it goes live, this upcoming Sunday, we're having a live call. It's at 2 p.m. Eastern to check in with our annual goals first off, set up and break down our quarterly goals, and then pick our action steps for July. So if you are a community member, make sure that you have it in your calendar to either join us live or watch the replay. And if you are not a community member, I would encourage you to join because prices of the community are actually going up at the end of the month. So I haven't really talked about that in a lot of places. Probably should do a better job of that, but that was in the plan a long time ago. So come join us for this quarterly goal refresh call if you are able. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, comment below with a book emoji, because that was the last example I used. And I can't think of anything else. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, please click that subscribe button. I upload new videos every week focused on helping you achieve your goals. Thank you so much for watching. Let me talk before? How do I want to transition that? Less comments. I feel like this video is just going to be entirely bloopers. My brain is completely linking on an example of always getting pushed to the backbone. To the backbone? To the back burner? How do I explain this?